Welcome to the Type 055 destroyer ship brief. This is one of the strongest ships in the world right now. It's also the best destroyer in the Chinese or PLAN Navy. PLAN is People's Liberation Army Navy. This is a Chinese equivalent of our Ticonderoga class that we're decommissioning. When I say we, I mean the United States. It's very similar to it in terms of number of weapons and sensor capability. It's arguably not as good as the Ticonderoga, but the truth is we don't know enough to say for sure that it's not as good. So we're going to go with what we know today and talk about the capabilities that we're aware of, its limitations as well, we'll point that out, and what we don't know. So the NATO name for this ship is the Renhai, or Renhai. They have built 8 of these in batch 1. They are building a second batch of 4, 2 of which are under construction right now in 2 different shipyards. So its primary role is air defense. However, it carries enough weapons to sink ships, a fleet, and land attack, and obviously air defense as well. And we'll go over each of these systems. So it's a 112 cell VLS broken up into 2 batteries, one on the bow, one amidships. It has anti-submarine capability, a ASW helicopter in the back, and is stealth incorporated into its hull shape and design. And it has the most powerful at-sea naval radar the Chinese own and operate, and that's called Dragon Eye. We'll talk about Dragon Eye during this. So let's talk about the 8 that they've built and the 2 that they're under construction and 2 that are under contract, the Type 055 Renhai. Let's begin with the weapon systems. On the bow, they have a large bore 130mm naval gun. Behind that is a 64-cell VLS that can shoot everything in the Chinese naval arsenal, from land attack missiles to anti-ship missiles, their new hypersonic missile, their long-range and medium-range anti-air missiles, and a torpedo can be vertically launched with a rocket that then parachutes the torpedo on a target. Behind that is a 1-point defense gun. It is the Type 1130. An easy way to remember this number is the 11 stands for the number of barrels on the gun. The 30 is the caliber, the millimeter. So it has 11 barrels of 30mm close-in weapon system. Behind the superstructure is the second VLS cell, and this one is 48 cells, but shoots the same cadre of weapons, pretty much everything. And behind that is the helicopter hangar, where we see the Z-90 helicopter, and on top of that is a point defense missile system, which is a short-range line-of-sight 24-cell surface-to-air missile system called the HHQ. The sensors on this thing are very advanced for China. First is the Dragon Eye radar right on the front superstructure. It's called the Type 346 Bravo ASA radar, and I'll be referring it to Dragon Eye from now on. At the very top of the mast is all the ESMs and ECMs and X-band radars. X-band radars are used for high update, close-in weapon system support in terms of self-defense and controlling the deck gun, including the Sea Whiz guns. On top of the mast is the communication ESM, the CSM. And what that is it's good for, collecting intelligence, bringing it into the CIC, where the computers use AI to help decipher it. And we'll talk about that in detail. And also in this family of Type 726 sensors are jammers, and those help protect the ship from incoming weapons and also obscuring its location to search radars and whatnot. Behind that on the missile deck are multiple Type 726 decoy launchers, and they can shoot everything out of these launchers. I'm talking chaff to obscure the ship from radar, flares to obscure the IR signature, and torpedo decoys now. They can launch torpedo decoys into the water around the ship so it doesn't get hit. And inside that hangar is one Z-20F ASW helicopter. So here's the ships that have been built. There's 2 different shipyards, the Jiangnan and Dalian shipyard. The first ship was laid down in 2014, and the last of batch 1 was commissioned in December 2022. There are 2 under construction right now, and there are 2 more under contract. So there will be at least 12 total of these. Here are the shipyards where they're being built. One is near Shanghai, and the second one is up near Beijing in North Korea area. That's the Dalian and Jiangnan shipyards. All right, so Type 055 by the numbers. It is a co-gag drive system. That's combined gas turbine and gas turbine. It has a total of 4 QC280 gas turbines, producing 150,000 shaft horsepower. That is a lot of shaft horsepower, but it comes at a cost of fuel efficiency. These are not very fuel efficient. The two gas turbines on each shaft, for a total of 2 shafts, and their controllable pitch, which means that they can change the pitch of the propeller blades to not bite as much water or grab as much water. The reasons they would do that are multiple, but one reason it would obscure the speed from sonar. They could be making turns for 10 knots while actually be only making 6 knots, and that would drive the sonarmen crazy because it would keep throwing off their solution. That's just one reason to have a controllable pitch propeller. It is a total of 13,000 tons. She's a big girl. She can do 30 knots at a great cost of fuel. If she wants to maximize her range of 5,000 nautical miles without refueling, she can only do 12 knots. And that's a severe limitation. That's a huge limitation for a warship in the 21st century, that their efficient speed for range is only 12 knots. If they go faster than that, that range drops dramatically and quickly. But she can also receive fuel and supplies at sea. So as long as they have a support ship with her, and their support ships only do about 18 knots, then she can go, as long as that support ship has fuel for her. So that's something to consider about this. We're going to talk a lot of great things about the Type 055 today, but always know that she is very limited in speed and range compared to modern NATO warships that average 32 knots easily at much better efficiency. Okay, let's move on to weapons. 112 cell VLS total, shooting the CJ-10 anti-ship missile. I'm sorry, that's land attack missile. The YJ-18 is the SSM surface-to-surface missile. The YJ-100 and YJ-21 is the hypersonic missile. The HHQ-9 Alpha Bravo is the surface-to-air missile. We're going to break all of these down for you. The CY-5/YU-8, that's the rocket that pushes the YU-8 torpedo out of that vertical launch tube. The HPJ-38 is the 130 millimeter naval gun on the front, and the HPJ-11 is that Sea Whiz right behind it. And of course, they have the ASW helicopter. That's the weapons. Let's talk about sensors. Of course, they have Dragon Eye, ASA radar, long range, highly accurate, can track over 100 contacts simultaneously at over 100 miles. It's huge. Very capable radar. They also have an X-band radar for more close-in, high update, direct the gun in the right direction, also intercept incoming missiles, X-band radar suite. The Type 726 electronic warfare suite is a collection of sensors that will intercept radars and classify them automatically for the operator, communications as well, whether it's voice or data, and attempt to decrypt them for the operators, and also radar intercept and direction finding. That's really big. So they know within a couple degrees, depending on the radar that they're detecting, where it's coming from. And it gives them things like signal strength, so they can make an educated guess as to maybe how far away that radar is. There's different ways of doing that, but that's signal strength is an important value that they can collect. And of course, they can jam radars too with this Type 726 system. 726 also includes the trainable launchers. Those are the decoy launchers that can shoot the chaff, the flare, and torpedo decoys now. And she has a full sonar suite. We're talking a hull-mounted sonar, a towed array, and a variable depth sonar that they can put down below the layer and search for submarines. So this ship has everything. Tons of weapons, and all the sensors China has is on board this 13,000-ton ship. Here's the QC-280 gas turbine. This gas turbine has quite the origin story. So originally, this was the GT-2500 American gas turbine that was built in Ukraine as the GT-25000. And that's the export number or model number of this engine. So this engine originates in the United States, is in a lot of ships around the world. This particular one was built in Ukraine, and China many years ago, over 10 years ago, before they started building these ships, bought a license and 10 copies of this from Ukraine. So Ukraine shipped up to 10 to China. It's not clear if all 10 were ever delivered, but before they got to the 10th one, China had already reversed engineered the GT-25000 from Ukraine, which was built from the GT-2500 from the United States. And they called it the QC-280. So essentially the same design, millimeter by millimeter, but not as good construction material and quality. And one of the big problems with this gas turbine, because they put it on more ships than just the Type 055, trying to put this on their other destroyers as well. And the blades that you can see here in the picture at speed would disintegrate. They would fly apart, ruining the engine. And a couple of smaller destroyers of a different class were in port for many years trying to figure this problem out. While they could copy the design, they could make exact copies, reverse engineering these engines. They could not hold up the same build quality standards that Ukraine and the United States had, and it showed for years. But they have worked that out. They make these engines now, they don't fly apart anymore, and they're putting them on the Type 55. So they've seemed to have fixed that. Now, the efficiency here is only 36% efficiency for this engine, and compared to the efficiency that we're seeing in the United States that use a similar engine, even though it's an exact copy, we see much more efficiency here in the United States than NATO ships use. So they still haven't figured out the efficiency problem yet. They're still only getting 5,000 nautical miles at 12 knots. But if they increase that efficiency, obviously that could change. So that's the story about the engines. Let's talk about this Dragon Eye radar. This thing is impressive. This was manufactured by the Nanjing Research Institute of Electronics and Technology. It's a advanced, updated version of the Type 346 Alpha. It has both separate S-band and X-band planar ASA radars there that you can see in the photo. So NATO calls S-band F-band. What you need to know is for air surveillance, it's 2 to 4 gigahertz transmitted frequency. And for air surveillance and mid-missile course correction, it's 8 to 12 gigahertz. Those are the frequency ranges that are going out, and those are the purposes of those two different frequency ranges. So this is both air and surface search and ballistic missile defense. They can track ballistic missile trajectory with this. We haven't seen an at-sea test that's successful of an intercepted ballistic missile from the Type 55 yet. But we know that they have the equipment to do it. They just haven't demonstrated the capability yet. The range is about 260 nautical miles. The azimuth is, basically 0 to 90, which is, from straight out to the horizon to straight up. And it's a 120-degree facing array, so they have 4 of these arrays around the ship. Very similar to the Aegis system in the United States, which we believe is what they're copying here. It does use a solid-state transmitter. They are upgrading that to digital, but there's some problems with that. I've pointed this out before in previous lectures. The solid-state transmitters that they use tend to fry, and they're replacing them frequently, but that's a small consideration, seeing how they can replace them and keep these ships at sea. All right, the 726 Electronic Warfare Suite. Like I said, it's a collection of instruments that do multiple things. The 726-1 is the radar interceptor. 726-2 is its direction finder, tells what direction the radar is coming from. 726-3 is the combined radar jammer. So once they figure out who it is, where it's coming from, they can jam that direction, obscure the location of the ship. And then finally, 726-5 is additional radar intercept and classification. The really big thing here is the operator console that we'll talk about in more detail in a minute. But a lot of the work that was done by human beings is being done by these computers now. So that's really the big advancement in the Type 726, is they can find a Chinese farmer, send him through the equivalent of boot camp, put him on board this ship, and he can spend a week learning how to operate the console. And in that time, he goes from boot camp to 1 week of training to becoming an Electronic Warfare Suite intelligence collection officer. It's because the computers and these sensors do most of the work with AI and the ability of these sensors, the sensitivity of it. And so it just tells the radar operator or the intercept operator what he's looking at. What is the message? What is the classification? So he doesn't need to know that already. He just needs to be able to read the display and operate his console. And that's really the big step forward here with this Type 726 Electronic Warfare Suite. Here's that decoy launcher. Soft kill countermeasures, 122 millimeter in diameter. It has a 24 barrel trainable launcher. Trainable, this thing can pivot left, right, and center. And they have a lot of them. There's 4 total of these, but each one has, 24 barrels, and they can reload these at sea. So it's a lot of decoys. They also have the new floating decoys that we first saw the Royal Navy and Naval Group from France develop, where they'll launch a decoy into the water to attract a anti-ship missile, and it looks like a big floating, bounce house basically, and they will throw those into the water from this ejection suite and leave it in the dust. And with jamming the ship's position and those floating radar reflectors in the wake will attract incoming anti-ship missiles. Those types of decoys are what this thing shoots. On the bow, let's talk about this HPJ-38, the 130 millimeter naval gun. This thing is impressive. It is a large bore, put a big hole in your ship gun, and it's got pretty decent range. It looks like it's a reverse engineered version of the Russian AK-130, which means it's water cooled, has a range of about 15.5 miles, firing rates 40 rounds per minute. But when it's a 130 millimeter round, it doesn't need to be that rapid. Each one is going to be a devastating round if it hits your ship. So it does have the ability to launch rocket extended range guided artillery shells. Those are the ones that are very precision orientated, GPS, or the Chinese version of GPS guided, and have a range of more than 100 kilometers. But they're very expensive rounds. So it's not clear how many of those they would have on board. And this gun, IOC it all the way back in 2005, predating the ship by 9 years. All right, CJ-10 cruise missile. This is a land attack cruise missile, Chinese version of the Tomahawk. The TERCOM uses internal guidance and satellite references. And then it's also literally looking at the terrain as it passes over it to make sure it checks with where it thinks it is. It's pretty advanced. The United States had this back in the 1980s, but we've got, or the Chinese have it now, and they're shooting it on board the ship. It's called the CJ-10 cruise missile. It's 1,000 nautical mile range. It's subsonic, think Tomahawk, and it is nuclear capable. They can put a nuclear warhead on this thing. Here's the YJ-100 cruise missile. This thing is pretty nasty. It has a 432 nautical mile range. It is subsonic, but it's also anti-countermeasure resistant, and can be deployed with the H-6 bomber or the Type 055 destroyers here. This is an anti-ship cruise missile. So it's inertially guided. It can do mid-course updates. It does have satellite reference, which means not only can it get the updates from the satellite, but it can use GPS, or the Chinese version of GPS. In the end, it's active radar and IR homing in on the ship, and that can be defeated. But this thing is a long-range, like I said, over 400 nautical mile anti-ship cruise missile, subsonic. The YJ-18 Alpha is also an anti-ship cruise missile. Its name is Eagle Strike, and they named it basically after the United States, after shooting the United States ships, it seems. It is a speed of 0.8 Mach, but the range here is 220 to 540 kilometers, depending on the variant. This one is vertically launched, so they can put a lot of these in the air rapidly, assuming the attempt would be to overwhelm a fleet's defense system to just burn through with a number of these subsonic missiles. What's really cool about the Eagle Strike is its terminal phase. Whenever it decides that it's got a target and it's going to burn through the point defense of the fleet, it goes from subsonic to 3 times the speed of sound, Mach 3 on its terminal phase. So once it knows where it's going to hit, it zooms, it just boosts into the target from over the horizon. So the Americans, or the target, we assume it would be the Americans, would see the missiles, a cloud of them, up to 112, if they shot the entire arsenal, coming over the horizon at 0.8 Mach, and then just one after the other, every couple seconds, each one would zip into the fleet from, 10, 15, 20 miles out and hitting the ships, in just a few seconds. That is an easier, or a practical way rather, of defeating point defense, because point defense can only shoot down so much so fast. And so point defense being anywhere, from range 0 to range, 10 to 20 nautical miles for point defense. And that's assuming they're using the deck guns to reach those kind of range. They're only going to hit a couple of targets. If these things are sitting at the 15-mile point and accelerating, changing speed, the delta in speed is what's hard to calculate. Going from 0.8 to 3 Mach 3, is going to take, a second or two. And in that second or two, that's going to throw off fire control solutions. And then once they reestablish the solution, then the point defense can engage again accurately. But by then, the missile is not at 15 nautical miles. It's at 5, and it's doing Mach 3. It's going to hit you in less than a second. So that's the effectiveness of the YJ-18 Alpha. It's this terminal supersonic boost phase that's going to disrupt point defense. These missiles have to be destroyed in the cruise phase, because once they reach terminal phase, we're going to take hits. The target is going to take hits. Here's the YJ-18 hypersonic anti-ship ballistic missile. This missile can be launched from mobile shore launchers, truck launchers, and from the Type055. So it's based on the DF-21 Delta. That's the land-based version. Cruise speed is Mach 6. Terminal speed is Mach 10. It is cold launch, 2-stage propulsion, goes up into a suborbital altitude and just come down from space like a meteor. And you can shoot it down, but you're not going to stop it from falling. And it's coming down, in a trajectory that's very vertical. So these are interceptable. We have the technology. The Aegis system can shoot this down, but it can't stop it from falling out of the sky. And so this is a very concerning weapon. We've only seen a couple launches. They have the ability to hit static targets, and they've shown the ability to hit a moving target on a land-based target range. Other than that, we don't have a lot of details. So this is a scary weapon. It does work. It does hit targets on target ranges that move, and that's all we know about it. And the United States and NATO in general, we do have ballistic missile defense on our fleets now. So these can be intercepted, but we have yet to see any case study of how effective this would be against an anti-ship ballistic missile defense. Moving on to the HHQ-9 surface-to-air missile. This is the long-range, medium-range fleet defense missile. HQ stands for Hong Kai, or red flag. It's designed to be a high-performance, or to shoot down high-performance aircraft, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and tactical ballistic missiles. So, like I said, the Dragon Eye radar can track ballistic missiles. Those be the tactical ones are the ones that are shot out of North Korea, for example. Relatively short range, not even suborbital, just basically a very high trajectory artillery ballistic arc. This missile can reach up and grab that. So the max range here is 81 nautical miles, and it's a proximity fuse, so it doesn't have to actually hard kill or direct hit the weapon. It can just explode near it and destroy the ballistic missile. This one, we first saw it in 2004, and it's been improved ever since. So at this point, 20 years later, it's probably pretty good. So we're going to assume that this thing can shoot down a ballistic missile, even though we've not seen an at-sea demonstration of this missile successfully intercepting a ballistic missile test. All right, the YU-8 CY-5 rocket-assisted ASW weapon. This basically is a YU-8 torpedo that's sitting on a CY-5 rocket, is all it is. And of course, they have a little parachute to keep the torpedo from just falling into the sea and breaking apart. So this thing will be vertically launched. It'll reach out to 16 nautical miles, drop the torpedo. That will then do a spiral search all the way down to the bottom and back up again and sit there and look for a submarine. Now, something about this weapon that is very important to understand is it doesn't have to hit your submarine to achieve its mission. This is also an area denial weapon. So if there's an area that they don't want a submarine to be in, for whatever reason, they'll shoot this weapon into that area and just have it spiral for 20 minutes. And of course, the submarines won't be able to get into that region. So think about these weapons as more than just, oh, I'm trying to sink a submarine. A lot of submarine or ASW warfare is making sure a submarine is not here. It could be anywhere else, but we know this place is safe because our weapon's over there. All right, the FL-3000 point defense system. This thing is a complete ripoff of a French system called the Corlay, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation of that. But it's also very similar to an American system called the RIM-116, which is a rolling intercepting missile, rolling airframe. The only thing difference here between the American system and the French system is this airframe doesn't actually roll when it is ejected, which affects its performance This is a heat-seeking missile, an IR missile that is very short range. They point this launcher that's on top of the helicopter hangar in the direction of the attack. And when incoming weapons or low-flying aircraft get within its weapons range, it can shoot this essentially sidewinder missile in the direction. For subsonic targets, it can reach out to 9 kilometers and get them. For supersonic targets, it's 6 kilometers. And this is a great example of why supersonic terminal phase is a big difference. It's the same point defense, but look at the effective range difference. Because you have a higher incoming speed of a supersonic missile, the time it takes to lock onto that target, that supersonic missile has already closed 3 additional kilometers than the subsonic missile has. So you're effectively, if you're shooting 3 missiles at this ship, you're getting 1 past this system based on 3 subsonic missiles because of that range difference. So it also has a 3-kilometer max altitude, and it's a Mach 2 missile. But think of a shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile that you may see in other footage. It's a very similar operation and range and effectiveness. All right, the Z-20 Foxtrot helicopter. This is a good ASW helicopter of the Z-20 family. It's very large. It appears to be a copy of the United States Seahawk helicopter, but it's bigger and heavier and not as efficient because that's the way China builds things right now. But it has a lot of the same capability. It has a surface search radar. It has a sonar, dipping sonar, including magnetic anomaly detection, MAD detector. It can drop torpedoes. It can drop sono buoys. It also has ESM and satellite communication. So all the sensors, whether it's a sonar buoy or it's that surface radar, search radar, all the sensor data that it collects is radioed back to the ship where it is then processed, and the information is given to operators there. Now, there are operators on board this helicopter, but all the information is also shared with the ship in real time. So max range of this helicopter is 300 nautical miles. That is significantly reduced every time they have to dip their sonar and hover. Hover burns a lot of fuel, and so that reduces their range. So, but know that its max speed is 190 knots and 160 knots cruise is what you're normally going to be seeing it as. All right, folks, that is the Type 055 destroyer, PLAN's strongest Navy asset, in my opinion, in terms of the large surface combatants anyway. It's got everything. It's got the best radar China makes. It's got all the weapons, 112 VLS cells. It has all the ESM, the latest decoys, including the new floating decoys, anti-submarine or torpedo decoys, as well as the traditional chafe and flare and smoke for obscuring the target. They threw everything on this ship, and they're building at least 12 of them. So 8 destroyers are in service now, and that is a problem for all the other nations that are going against China. For instance, Taiwan is trying to build some submarines now to try to counteract this increasing fleet that we're seeing come out of China. But it's with the ASW capability and the weapon systems on board this ship, I'm afraid that one of these is comparable. In my opinion, I wouldn't say it's comparable to the Ticonderoga. I'd say it's more comparable to the Arleigh Burke, maybe the Flight 2s, which is still a very good ship. The problem is they've only got 8 of them compared to the Arleigh Burkes. We have like 70, the United States does. So we still have a huge advantage over China, but this ship is a very capable Chinese warship, and that needs to be understood. This is no joke. This is not a disposable ship. This is a real capable warship that has some range and fuel efficiency problems, but they're also not going very far right now. They're worried about South China Sea, Taiwan. They're keeping these ships close to home. And so that's negating that inefficiency by them not needing to go very far. And they can refuel and resupply at sea. So that also limits that as well. So just remember, main propulsion is co-gag, incorporating 2 gas turbines on each shaft for a total of 4. They have the extensive sensor range, and it is the most powerful warship, surface combatant, large surface combatant in the PLAN. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate all the YouTube members and Patreon members. You guys are the best, and we'll see you next time.